Afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Beckles, and I'm the Vice President of Social Impact and Innovation at RBC. For many, many years, my work has been focusing on strengthening the capacity of our local communities to thrive economically and socially and culturally, and to be safe, productive, and resilient. And the work that everyone in this room is doing is part of that sort of hands-on effort. And all the more important now with the challenges that we heard about today. I really am hopeful as a result of the conversations that we are having. But we're also gathered here today in an important place, Canada's capital region. And we're lucky enough to now hear from two really passionate place activists from both sides of the border. From Washington, D.C., Seth Kaplan, who is an international affairs expert and author, whose new book, Fragile Neighbourhoods, has just been released, and Zita Cobb, Canada's resident place advocate, whose first home was Fogo Island, but she now lives here in Ottawa, her second place. So from residents of two capital cities, please welcome first Seth Kaplan and Zita, and a lively conversation will follow. Thank you.
So first, I want to thank Mary for running such a great event, and Laura and everybody else here. I think we should give Mary some applause for all the work. I hear this is the first and certainly not the last annual conference, so we have to appreciate all the work that's gone into this event. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about my book, and I'm going to talk, let me first lay the groundwork that you will see that I think neighborhoods are very important. They're a way to frame many of our social problems. And I want to first start off by explaining where I come from, that I wrote this book, and then lead into the discussion about why I wrote the book and then what we're talking about. So first, imagine my day job. My day job, if you ask people in Washington, who is Seth Kaplan, for the most part, everybody will think of me as the fragile states person. I've been in about 75 countries. I've worked in about 35 countries on a daily basis. I'm literally working this morning on my phone on Libya and Nigeria, where I have groups of people trying to reduce violence or end the civil war. And as part of this work for many years, I have written lots of publications. That's the first major book on fragile states. This is the one and only United Nations World Bank joint report, conflict prevention, and this is an organization I've co-managed for the last 11 years. And so I've been doing this work, and I will just say the one very quick takeaway about what I do that's extremely different than what most people do when they look at fragile states is that I'm really interested in the society and the fragile nature of relationships and social dynamics that will lead to a greater risk of violence or a greater risk of basically economic stagnation. So I'm always starting with the nature of relationships. About 2015, 2016, I was asked over and over and over again, without even me prompting people, is the U.S. becoming a fragile state? And you can understand why with the election, and what was going on with the election made a lot of people in Washington nervous. And they were asking me this. When it happened by the sixth or seventh time I had to do something about it, I know some Canadians would wish the United States would become a fragile state, but putting that aside, I had to explore this question. And so I spent a lot of time researching the topic. And I think the big question that we need to ask ourselves, given that our constitutions haven't changed, our electoral systems haven't changed, many of our organizations and institutions haven't changed. If anything, there's more of them. What has changed? And for me, the starting point always is, what is different in our relationships, and how is that affecting the nature of what is going on in society, and then how is that leading to different outcomes? And so I think the big change that we need to understand is, for all of human history, going back from the first settlements, which are 11,000, 12,000 years ago, until World War II, 1950s roughly, everybody lived in place-based communities. Place-based communities, you shopped locally, you use local schools, you use local businesses, you use local markets, local whatever public spaces, local houses of worship. Everything was local. You knew people, you had a lot of institutions, you had a lot of networks, and they embedded people in these relationships, and they gave life a meaning. And then after World War II, we have a completely different, especially in the 1960s and 70s, because of cars, we have a completely different development pattern, and that pattern is not only physical, it also has led to dramatic changes in the nature of institutions. And so the net result is we are now network societies. And I think this is especially true in North America, more than you might find in Southern Europe or some other more, I would say, more compact societies with more traditional social systems. And this is very dynamic, and this gives great opportunity to lots of people that maybe didn't have opportunity previously. But what it means is that there's a lot of people who we can't see it easily, but they are not in a good network. They don't have a network. They didn't go to the right school or join the right organization to get a good network, and they feel left behind. They're not left behind because they're less smart. They're left behind because they're in the wrong network. They don't have the right institutions. It leads to distressed neighborhoods. It leads to a lot of people being isolated. And we have a lot of people who feel like this. They're anxious, they're depressed, they're alone. They have freedoms, but they have no supporting relationships on a day-to-day basis. And for all of human history, people lived. There were, of course, downsides, but what people had was a lot of relationships and a lot of institutions, many informal, that supported people on a daily basis. And today, we're very much isolating people. And when you look at things in Canada, things about membership in groups, volunteering, and other things, number of friends, we have a decline in all these things. And as a result, we have loneliness, we have decline in, let's say, mental health and other issues like that. We have rising depression. We have in all of North America, this study I know got a lot of attention in Canada, we have rising loneliness. And so all of this is affecting people. It may not affect you and me, and if you have a strong, intentional nature, you can go and solve these problems. But if the physical and institutional landscape leaves people alone, we cannot ask over 40 million Canadians to each intentionally go out and solve your problems and make more friends and join more associations. We can encourage it, but if we don't have the physical and institutional landscape, it won't happen. For me, what's most astounding when you study the subject is how much place matters. When I mean place, I'll give you one simple statistic. Depending on your neighborhood in Canada, there's a 20-year difference in lifespan. Just think about that. In my country, it's 40. In Canada, there's a 20-year, I looked up the statistics just to confirm, there's a 20-year difference in lifespan depending where you live. That is a very rough proxy of well-being. It's not a perfect one. But if there's such a difference in well-being, there's also going to be great differences in many, many other indicators. This is from the Center on the Developing Child from Harvard. It's about children, and I want you to see about how they define well-being. Relationships and social institutions is the inner core, then it's the built environment, and then it's policy. Mostly when we debate social problems, we think about policy. I want to tell you the inner core is the most important, and the middle core shapes the inner core very much. For a long time, we've known about the neighborhood effect. This is mostly about distressed neighborhoods, but I don't think it's only about distressed neighborhoods. Raj Chetty, the most well-known expert in the United States on social mobility, has proven over and over again through data how much neighborhoods matter. But I want to make it clear that when I talk about social poverty, I'm not only talking about poor people. You can live in a materially well-off neighborhood and not know a single person. I ask each of you, how many of your neighbors do you know? And if you had an emergency, could you find somebody in your neighborhood who could help you in the next 15, 30 minutes? This is a quote from Naomi Schaefer Riley, and I do believe part of this is we're afraid to show we're vulnerable. We're afraid to reach out and show that we have needs, and we become very self-isolating. But again, for me, it's partly about how we've designed society. So the key point I want to make is that neighborhoods have a huge impact on society as well as individual well-being. Many of our social ills sit downstream from neighborhoods. We all live in a place, and yet we have built a placeless society. You can see this physically just by driving around. You drive around, and there's nice house, nice house, nice house, nice green area. Where do these people meet? How do they know each other? They may not go to the school locally. There may not be a local association. There may be no opportunity where they will meet unless they get out of their house and knock on a door. Some people will do that. Many of us will not. So how do we design society so it's not only physically but institutionally designed to help people? What can we do about it? We want to ensure that society is organized around flourishing neighborhoods. Every person should live in a flourishing neighborhood that is economically flourishing, and for me, very important, socially flourishing. That's rural, suburban, urban. Everyone, wherever you are, that is essential. And that means strong institutions. That means a supportive landscape. That's probably about the design of the landscape. A flourishing society needs to be built on flourishing neighborhoods. And I love this quote. It's from one of the organizations I look at my book. We have lots and lots of huge problems and challenges in our society. If we think of them as lots of little problems, neighborhood by neighborhood problems, we can solve them. There is no magic bullet. There's only lots and lots, place by place, neighborhood by neighborhood, thinking how to make our society better. And so just thank you very much, and we will talk. I will be over there by the books afterwards. If you have any questions and you want to talk about anything, feel free to find me. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. So I just want to say that these two are both big takas. And when I asked them if they'd do the session together, because I thought it'd be useful for you to hear Canada, U.S., and I had seen Seth's book, and I was very familiar with Zita's thinking around place, and I thought, oh, there's some interesting connections here. But the challenge for these two, to each of them put in their under 10 minutes, is a bit of a miracle, and you were right on the nose. 10 and a half minutes. And Zita's going to have a similar challenge in that she's also, these folks run around and give big, long, thoughtful talks. So treat this like a little teaser. It's like the lunch. It's a buffet. And you need to know that you can go online and hear them in more detail and hear them talk at a more leisurely pace about all the different things that their work takes them on. But I'm going to now ask Zita to give us her perspective on place, and then the two of you are going to have a conversation. And I'm going to just be here eavesdropping, asking the odd question.
Okay, I'm slightly competitive. Seth, you did it in 10. I'm going to do it in less. There are only 50 slides, and I have to say something that has nothing to do with slides, which is, I agree with you so much, it's about networks. And to me, the big question, which has to manifest in the small question, is how does the part belong to the whole? How does a person belong to their local place? How does a place belong to the bigger place, to the region, to the country? And it's a wiring. What's the wiring that holds us together? I come at it from the economy. And in a way, my whole life is 65 so far. I'm not finished my whole life yet. But every time someone says urban-rural divide, I have a mini stroke. So maybe I'll end it here today, because I've heard urban-rural divide a lot today. There is no urban-rural divide. Can we all agree on that? There's just different places of different sizes. Okay, we're going to go through this super fast. Fogo Island, a small island, is a good way to understand, because you can see cause-effect, and it's bounded. This is this island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. I know we have a lot of people from the United States here today. Newfoundland, before it joined Canada in 1949, wanted to join the States, but they didn't want us, so we're Canadian. And there is Fogo Island, up there at the top. It's 4 times the size of Manhattan, so not a small place. And in my lifetime in this place, well, for 4 centuries, the people of English and Irish descent who have lived there came for this, for fish. The North Atlantic cod, which is the most important thing. We built things like this. We fished in little boats like this, and then this happened. This was part of a money system that we didn't understand. It arrived, it took all the fish. 350 years of culture pretty much collapsed, or was in danger of collapsing overnight. The economy collapsed overnight. This fellow was my father, who could not read, never had a bank account, had deep ecological logic, deep social logic. He understands, Seth, what it was like to live with people, and we were very much tangled up with each other. I have a nephew who, when I started this work, was 8, and every time I talk about community and community economic development, he used to say to me, is it a community or is it a commutiny? If it's working well, it's a commutiny, because it means you're talking to each other. Anyway, so my father said, after not understanding why anyone would take all the fish, he said, well, they must be turning it into money, which is, of course, exactly what was happening. This happened all across Newfoundland and Labrador, too. We didn't resettle, but I want to say this. No coincidence, this Resettlement Act was in the late 60s, Friedman's famous article about this. So this is all about the wiring. I think about the economy as wiring. And when the economy forgot about place, well, places fall out of the hole. Little places fall out first. I have a brother, he used to live at Yonge and Eglinton. I used to say, you better get your arse home and help us with this project, because the things that are eating us, this wiring, is going to come to Yonge and Eglinton too. And it has come to Yonge and Eglinton. So we have the wrong economy. We were saved by art, because art is a different logic system. The people who came from the National Film Board at Memorial University, I was around between 8 and 10 when all this was happening. They had no answers, but they had lots of good questions. And the questions really all had to do with focusing us on what we cared about. So we formed a cooperative in 1967. None of this was easy. It was a tangle of disagreements around religion, around everything, but we actually managed to find the complicated answer. There is nothing more freaking complicated than a cooperative in a small community. It's an organized way to fight with each other. And I think that's what we need more of. This is the co-op they formed. It's still the most important part of our economy to this day. The cod are coming back ever so slowly. We fish for other species. This co-op exports to just about everywhere on Earth. So I think somebody this morning started into, as Bruce, I think you were asking a question about scale. This is, I think, what in particular Canada has to figure out. How can we become masters of all scales? If you want to run a fishery on a little island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland, we do not need a transnational fishing company. We can do it just fine, as long as we have the technological tools. And I know that people think innovation happens in cities, and I know it does. It also happens in small places. This was very innovative. So this is the kind of tangle we have today. More women in the room these days, nice to see. Anyway, this is what I have learned in my life so far. It matters who owns what, because the owners set the business model, and the business models determine the outcomes. If our fishery was owned by a transnational organization, we wouldn't be living on Fogo Island today. Now, if you need to drill for oil and gas off the coast of Newfoundland, a little local co-op's not going to do it. So we have to be masters of working at that scale too. And so my old boss used to say, the most important thing is keep the most important thing. The most important thing, nature and culture are the two most important things. Sadly for us, we are physical creatures. We are meaning-seeking creatures. We're social creatures. So we need to be in a place. We're born in a place, we live in a place, and we're going to die in a place. And all of our relationships are held by the place. Like, I can't figure out what it means when people don't think about place. And business and technology are our two great tools. So we have to turn that around. I love the work of John Fullerton. I'm just pointing to it. The Capital Institute. I think he's one of the best thinkers in this. So our work, I went home in 2006 from a career in business and technology. I worked in a deep, big silo. And I came home and I realized from the ground, from the place, none of these silos are organized to serve place. None of them. So where all the silos hit the ground, called the horizontal, it all goes to shit. When I hear people talk about the role of municipal governments, we had 5 municipal governments in 2006. it was like a tangle of knots you couldn't navigate. We have one now. That's an improvement. So I guess we've regionalized in our own little way. Anyway, Shorefast is the charity I set up with the brother, including the one who lived at Young and Eglinton. And we organize ourselves this way, around a poem. It's about holding on and reaching out. And for every place, this is what we have to do. And it's like, yeah, it's like walking. And I think this is the battle we're in. The economy does have a soul if we give it one. No amount of me going to play bingo on Thursday night is going to make up for an economy that doesn't contain social actions and social connections. So we got to get the right economy, got to get the right words. We can find the words, maybe we'll find a way. We keep calling things assets that are not assets. Money's not an asset, it's a resource. People are not a resource. Nature is not a resource, it's an asset. Most investment is not development. What is development? Taking the inherent value in people and places and bringing it forward to make it stronger. So just thinking different. Is this development? No, not on Fogo Island. That's not on Fogo Island, by the way. Sorry, all the rest of the pictures are. So this is what we're doing now. It's Shorefast. We're still working on Fogo Island. Oh, and I do live on Fogo Island, Mary, just saying. I'm in Ottawa a lot, too. I went to university in Ottawa. I love Ottawa. Yeah. This is from Gil Chin Lim. He was an urban planner who said, we have to create a global network of intensely local places. We need very different economic wiring than we have to do that. John McKnight's work around asset-based community development is essentially what people were doing in the 60s, is what we do on Fogo Island now, and these are the questions. What do we know, what do we have, what do we love, what do we miss, and what can we do about it? It's building a future based on what you have, not what you don't have. We started with art. We built a bunch of studios. This is an art project I don't have time to explain because I still want to compete with Seth on time. We built an inn, which when we were starting it, everybody said it's not normal, practical, reasonable, or rational. And it wasn't. If you use the prevailing economic logic, it makes no sense. But if you use a different kind of logic about what has value, it makes lots of sense. This is the inn. It's magical because it's made of the fabric of the place. We didn't copy any generic fancy inns from anywhere else, and every place has a specificity, and knowledge is in a place, and joy is in a place, and we can build great economic assets in that way. Every object you see there, we made. That made, guess what? That made more economy. And yeah, these are the words we steer by. We think about the economy. Diane Hodgins is here today, who is kind of the pioneer of this. We think about nutrition, economic nutrition. We take the label, which happened in my lifetime, and we just simply tell you, where does the money go? This is where it goes for the inn. If everything that was offered for sale in the world had a label that told you where the money went, we'd be fixing the wiring pretty quickly. And we started a little fish business. I mean, we have the co-op, which is a big fish business, relatively speaking. We Shorefast started this one. It's all about hand-line cod. So we wanted to make a different market model as the fish start to come back. Fish means cod in Newfoundland, by the way. And so we take these fish mostly to Toronto, a little bit to Ottawa, and sell them one by one because they're caught one by one, they're loved one by one, they died one by one. And look at the economic nutrition label. 69%, I think that is, goes back to Fogo Island. So we think about the economy as turning money into fish. When people say there's not enough money, that's true. Like for most of the things we had, there's not enough money. Sometimes I think there's too much money. That's what got us into this problem. I try not to use the word sustainability because it sounds like it's all done. Should never be a noun. Good thing that the economist is thinking about places. This is what we have to do. We have to make that systemic tilt. Seth, you're going to win. I have 17 seconds left. This is what we have to do. So if Canada doesn't have an economic strategy, I don't know if that's true, but maybe that's a good if we don't, because then we can start fresh. And I think how we should start is every single person, no matter what we do, where we work, leave our desk, leave the building, go out and lie down in the street and look up at the place, from the ground where we are. And then let's make an economic strategy from there. And so with CUI, we did a pilot project during the lockdowns, and it was around how do we strengthen community economies, framed in Rajan's book. He said a simple thing in this book, The Third Pillar. He said human societies rest on three pillars: markets, governments, and communities. And unless and until we strengthen that community pillar, all of our nightmares will come true. And I'm going to go to, these were the four things we focused in on as the levers of how you strengthen community economies. I'm sure you can all read. I'm going to go to the next slide. We map our economies. We should know everybody's an economic actor, every institution is an economic actor, and let's figure out how all the economic actors touch a place. And we think about ourselves. We're practitioners of economy, and that's it. Seth, you beat me by 1 minute and 43 seconds.
You had more beautiful slides.
Thanks. So now you can reset the clock for us, and we're going to just have a bit of conversation between the two of you. You're both, Shorefast is actually about tethering, right? Is that what it is?
It's about tethering money to place. It's about making it possible to attach ourselves, keep attached to place. I mean, more Newfoundlanders work outside of the place because economies just keep failing than are in the place. Yeah, it is about tethering to place.
Because I think that's, Seth, what you're talking about. I mean, I'm always interested. I'm sorry that Janice Stein has left. I don't think she's in the house. Maybe she came back. But it's important for us, and Bruce as well, and others like Seth. You guys have been working in the international sphere, and it's like suddenly you've wakened up and said, oh, wait, neighborhoods kind of matter too. And how do we tether people? Is tethering important to our sense of belonging?
I think we need to think of society as being horizontal. That's a term I use a lot. I use it when I'm working on a country, Nigeria, Libya. And when we look at the challenges our society faces, we need to think that every place along the horizontal needs to be doing well. When we just look at one vertical number, GDP, I mean, we do want to grow the economy, but that is not reflective of how well all those places are doing. So we need a way to measure how well we're doing horizontally, and we need a way to ensure that every place, it's about tethering, but it's also about practically finding ways that each of those places can thrive. If your place can't thrive, it won't tether. These two issues, which I think is being
And we should
talked
stop
about
breaking
very
them.
well.
We got to stop breaking them because there's a whole lot more work to fix them after we've broken them.
Totally. It's much easier to build than revitalize afterwards.
So, Zita, your pilot, when you went across the country, part of what you were trying to do, I think, is create a narrative that suggests that there's a commonality across this. I mean, we think, CUI says we're in the connective tissue business. You've heard all morning, this country is a vertically organized country. Canada, province, municipal. We're saying, wait a sec, the narrative is actually at the local level.
That's how people experience it. I mean, we often talk up here, some big issue, but think about how the 40+ million Canadians are experiencing life. They're experiencing it very much dependent upon where they live. And if we don't think about the country horizontally, we end up with these one-size-fits-all, very top-down. We tend to nationalize problems when what people want are things in their specific place that will make that place better.
We nationalize problems when we need to localize solutions.
Yes.
How's that for
very
a tweet?
well
Somebody
said.
X that. Okay.
Let's
Go
borrow
ahead.
that.
Zita, you, in the terms of the commonality, that's, I guess, what I'm getting at for you. Your work, I'm interested, Zita's probably from the easternmost part of the country here. Anybody is there anything further east than Fogo?
I think Cape Spear is a bit further
Anybody
east. and
here
maybe
from Cape
St.
Spear?
Charles.
No.
Nobody lives in Cape Spear.
So Zita is from the furthest east. Who's here from the furthest west? You, Lisa, former Mayor of Victoria. You'd be the furthest west. How do we stitch that narrative together? We're such a vast country with a tiny population.
I think when we were doing this pilot, which I glossed over because I was wanting to race to the end, the 4 levers, in case you didn't see them, that we arrived at, I mean, there are many more, but these are probably the most important ones, that about strong community economies is access to financial capital. I'm answering your question indirectly, Mary.
That's fine.
Access to financial capital, which is not assured outside of the major urban centers. I'm sure you know what's happening in commercial banking in our country. Banks are pulling out of places, faster than we can count. We used to have a bank on Fogo Island. It's a perfect example again. We no longer have a bank. When we started our work in 2006, we had a credit union and a bank. Now we have neither. So how do you develop without access to commercial lending? That's a big one. Architectures for Collaboration was another one of the levers. And this actually, I think is maybe the most urgent one. And I heard a lot of this from the conversation this morning. Architectures for Collaboration in the local, in the regional and at the national. And I've given up actually thinking about collaboration because I think that's too hard. I think what we need to do is just coordinate. That's like a lower bar.
You don't have to like each other.
You don't have to like each other, exactly right. And so in most places, so the communities in our pilot project were Fogo Island, Prince Edward County, Hamilton, London, and Victoria. And I would say Victoria, and every time I say this, I know the people in Victoria that were involved in the project rolling their eyes saying, there she's saying that again. I was super impressed with the South Island Prosperity Partnership in Victoria, which is a brilliant piece of coordinating architecture that involves the city of Victoria and the municipalities that are around and the businesses and in many of the communities, what often happens is people, someone talked about this morning, people think, well, the mayor must be in charge of this place. The mayor must be in charge of economic development. Well, I know we got lots of really smart mayors in this room. If there's a mayor in this room or anywhere else that thinks they can do economic development by themselves, I would like to meet them. And so it's like, how do we come together in a local place? A community is the sum of all of us in a place. And we don't have, I think we need more formal structures for how we work together in the interest of our economy. And if the world is telling us anything right now, as Janice said this morning, is that, we actually don't all agree on stuff. And I think that's too high a bar to think that we're all going to agree. We have different values. But we should be able to agree on the economy. And if we can do that, then I can play bingo and you can do something else.
You want to go with the other pillars? There were 4.
Oh yeah, the levers. And so the levers, yeah, so it was data, access to data at the community level. And I was sitting with people at my table who are data people. And we don't have data at the local level about how we're doing economically. You can barely get it at the provincial level. So that's a problem. It's hard to organize and move forward if you can't even get a baseline. And then the other was just the local capacity. And of course, I come out of the business world. I'm a big believer that entrepreneurs don't fall out of the sky. They're actually born somewhere. I don't think they're particularly special. I think everybody here is an entrepreneur, has the potential to be one, and communities give birth to them. And we just need to support them properly. And so this sort of capacities for how we innovate and steward an economy in a place.
And the last one.
That was the last one, wasn't it? Hang on. Architecture through collaboration, access to financial capital, data, and local capacity.
And local capacity. Okay.
Yes.
Seth, you in the book talk, come on over here, Berta, I can take them. Seth, you talk in the book about neighborhood quarterbacks. What's a neighborhood quarterback?
Okay, well, first, if I may just say before that, it's very important that we think of our landscape physically as well as institutionally, that we are each in a place. And many places, each in a place with a defined, I talk about the need to define a place, have an identity with a place, ideally a beginning and end and a center, and have its own set of institutions. And I want to ask you, how many places do you live that have that identity, have that center, have those institutions? That is essential and related to the last question. And then we need to measure success by how well each of those places, those neighborhoods are doing. So when we talk about neighborhood quarterback, in a place that has lots and lots of local institutions, people will have mechanisms to come together and lead efforts to make a place better. But if you're in a place, a neighborhood that lacks those institutions, a neighborhood quarterback could be a very essential fill-in. I mean, if you think of distressed neighborhoods, that might be obvious, but I can also think of some materially well-off neighborhoods in which no one talks to each other, in which some sort of neighborhood quarterback has a role to play to solve what we might think of as some sort of collective action failure in that neighborhood. The neighborhood quarterbacks that I talk about are quarterbacks affiliated with an organization called Purpose Built Community based in Atlanta that sets up quarterbacks for distressed neighborhoods, and these quarterbacks coordinate change in everything from education, career, cradle to career, to community amenities, to, I think most importantly, ensure every neighborhood that it works on has quality low and quality mixed income housing. So these are in some ways, dramatic changes to what a neighborhood is like. And if there are good institutions, and lots of them, this might happen organically, but when there's a lack of institutions, a quarterback is something that can be established to bring stakeholders together, to raise money, to raise profile, to work with different parts of the government. It's very important to understand this, that governments work in silos. They don't work based upon neighborhoods. I think they should work on neighborhoods, and we should, again, measure success neighborhood by neighborhood. But to the extent that government is thinking housing, healthcare, education, and so on and so forth, a quarterback brings all these parts together to solve the collective action problem of how do we make a place better.
And that is the local, that's what I'm talking about, as a
Very
local
it's locally
architecture,
led,
it's the
totally
local architecture.
locally led. So
Yes.
your collaborative mechanisms are very similar to what I just described. They work differently, but the goal is the same.
You can't have an American on a Canadian program and not have a sports analogy surface at some point.
I'm sorry,
It's
if you want
fine.
to talk
It's
about
fine, but
American
it's-
football with Canadian football,
Yeah,
we'll have
we're going
a-
to come to the U.S. and start talking about skips and isn't it skip? Skip. Aren't you impressed? I know what the hell a skip is. Okay. I'm interested. This idea of my reluctance around quarterbacks is that I don't believe anybody is the boss of a city. I think that, or a community. That's one of that's always my fear, is that we're going to tamp out.
Somebody will come in and impose.
Impose.
That's the fear. I mean, it happens often now when there's no local capacity to
push back.
To push back. So a quarterback, to a certain extent, fills a void. There's a danger always from what you say that you want change to be inside out, not outside in. It's really important inside out. A quarterback done right will have local stakeholders, local leaders, local accountability. But when we have none of that, just think the government makes decisions, or a urban or provincial government makes decisions, and it affects lots of neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods, they're not organized to advocate. They're not organized to push back. It's already happening exactly what you described.
Zita, it's interesting when you use art and culture, and you're in a environment where landscape is very dominant. And I'm interested, how do we understand the nurturing component of this? You're looking at a room that's full of people, several of whom work for a unit called a business improvement area. And they are...
It's a little island.
Hmm?
It's like, I think about
It's
it
like
as
a
a
little
island.
island. Mark Garner,
That's
where are you?
very-
Mark Garner.
Very close to the next island.
Mark Garner had it from downtown Yonge. He's now downtown Calgary. Used to talk about Yonge Street was like Fogo Island. And you're stewards of a place. It's this notion of stewardship of a place. We have models.
It absolutely is. My father used to say, because Fogo Island's got 11 communities, and here's actually how Fogo Island managed to amalgamate when nobody thought we ever would. These communities are not that far from each other, but in our minds they were very far, because we had a lot of strife across religions. And so, like, I grew up in a place called Joe Bat's Arm. Tilting is 5 kilometers away. I never went there till I was 13. And my father figured out that a community is the distance you can walk before dark. So that's a neighborhood. It's a community.
Right.
And that's where we know each other. And that's where we encounter each other. That's where that's where the specificity of our lives are lived. And so I think we can map flows of people and money in and out of a place. And we can understand what is in this place of ours, this neighborhood of ours. Now, I mean, that picture you showed, Seth, is that looked like a terrifying place. Where was that?
That suburb, the suburb.
That's a very typical American suburb.
Wow.
I could have taken
It's
that
nameless.
picture in, I don't know, 100 places, and it would all be the same, more or less.
Right, so there's no local in
There's
that
no
place.
center, there's no
No,
identity.
right.
All you have is your house and this green area, yes, but there's no way for people to meet each other unless you go and knock on doors.
But
Right.
this is, I mean, I was interested, come on, Berta, you can bring me the card right here. When I heard Marion talking about manufactured housing, I get nervous, because isn't in many ways what we're talking about the result of an industrialized approach where we just
Yes,
ka-ching, ka-ching,
yes.
ka-ching,
It's
housing.
industrial.
And aren't you guys saying, I mean, Bruce is saying you're going to reshore and bring everything home. Is this our moment to rethink our economy?
I think we have to rethink it from the ground up.
Yes, horizontally.
Yes, and when we think, but don't forget to follow the money, or think about because that's the wiring, and then I think about plumbing as the way that like financial resources can flow into a place. So when a bank leaves a place, and Bruce had a more gentle word, what he called places that have been disinvested. I like that. I call them stranded assets. When that happens, we have to build the plumbing so that money can flow back in. And it may not be in the conventional ways. I mean, who expects a commercial bank to go building a new building in a place with 2,500 people? It's not going to happen. But you know, we're at this kind of exciting time because we're moving from the cybersphere to nanosphere, that's a whole journey of its own. But we have still not figured out how to reckon with atoms. You know, the atomic level of our physical, our physical lives. Mm-hmm. And not that I like going around quoting Peter Thiel, because not my favorite thinker, but anyway, he's smart. And he said, you know, in the world of bits, things are actually pretty easy to figure out. It's the world of atoms that's really hard. So we should start where it's hard and figure it out. Like, let's all leave this room today and go out and lie in the street and then start to figure out how things work in this place.
And we need to always think there's people and there's people's lives and people live in places, neighborhoods. And if we're designing an economy, but for me, a society, and all of our structures are designed in a way that literally encourages people to be alone and isolated from one another, what is the natural result? The natural result is the picture I showed when people are mistrustful, alienated, and depressed. It's a natural result, and if we don't think differently, we will have more of the same natural result.
So on that note,
let's be positive. We can make a difference. We can go back to a better organization and still be very wealthy. I believe it's true.
Z, did you have a last word?
I agree.
20 minutes. Seth's going to sign some books. We'll be back in 20 minutes for the sessions at 2. Thank you.